On behalf of the One Book Committee, welcome to the 7th Annual One Book, One Region Kickoff. My name is Betty Ann Ryder. I'm Head of Adult Services here at the Groton Library, and I've been involved with this project since its beginning. It's hard to believe that this is our 7th years, that we've been doing this for 7 years. The selection committee changes a bit from year to year. We have librarians from public, school, and college libraries, teachers, and interested community members who get together from October through April. We begin by reading books, and usually by February or March, when we still haven't decided, we expect everyone to read even more. It's a good way to be exposed to good books, but even a better way to start a lot of books only to have to put them down when you realize that it's just not going to work for one book, and the next title is waiting for you. Because it's important to remember that when we make our choice each year, we're looking for more than just a good story. Our book needs to have some substance, some quality that brings people together to discuss what they've read. We need to appeal to readers of all ages, from high school through adults, and have some topic that will allow libraries to create programs related to themes in the book. This year we knew we wanted a story that was positive, left you feeling good, and we think we found it. The story of the grandson of slaves who works his whole life, lives in the segregated South, doesn't learn to read until he's 98, and can still say, "Life is so good." Before we introduce our guests, please let me offer some thank yous. And first is the committee. A lot of our committee members are here. There's a list of them up on one of these boards. And as I said, they're from all over the area, librarians, teachers, just community members who are interested. And they really do a lot of work to make this happen every year. We also would like to thank the Community Foundation of Southeastern Connecticut for their ongoing support. They have been part of this since the beginning, and it's really through them that we are able to make this work every year through their generous support. The Bolton Community Education Foundation is one of our newer supporters. They've been with us the last couple of years, and again, they are very actively involved on the committee and with having the author come up and talk to all of their students. We also would like to thank the Courtyard Marriott of Norwich, the NFA class of 1998, and Bank Square Books. Programs will be taking place at libraries and throughout the region all summer long. Bookmarks and flyers are on the back table, and we ask that you please take some. And if you're from a library, please take a lot of bookmarks so that you can pass them around to your patrons. We have thousands of them, and I want to get them out there. Also, please check our website, which is just onebookoneregion.org, for the latest information. And one more reminder, after this afternoon's event, you're all invited back to Bank Square Books in Mystic to talk to the author and be there for a book signing. And now I am pleased to introduce Jim Landhair from Norwich Free Academy, who has been one of our committee members right from the beginning, and he's also the person who suggested this year's title.
Thank you. Yesterday I had a great opportunity to meet with a friend of mine who I've probably known for about 30 years. And like many of you with friends that you've had that long, even though in this case my friend lives over 1,000 miles away and I only see him about once or twice a year, you're able to pick up that conversation where you left off 6 months ago. And after you go through the recent successes and setbacks of your children, and discussing, and more setbacks sometimes, and you get to discuss some of your aging relatives and their various ailments, in some cases losses, you get into a very comfortable pattern of conversation. Last week when the reporter asked me, how did we pick these books? And Betty Ann kind of referred to the fact she left out the part about reading and arguing about the books. One of the things that I remembered yesterday, and I remembered, is that life really is pretty good. We forget too often that we have great things in our lives. And every once in a while, I know, we complain about the prices of gas and the prices of food, and we get trapped in the things that are happening day in and day out. And we don't step back every once in a while and reflect on how really positive some of our friends are, and how fortunate we are with our friends and our family. The reporter also asked, well, are there themes that you always look for? And as I look back over the years, and yes, we've been doing this is the 7th year, I looked at, there's really 2 themes that we've kind of used over and over again. There was one that talked about friendship and betrayal and then redemption. And the second theme seemed to be that there is possible that one person can make a difference in people's lives. And as I looked at that, I saw those themes. I saw those themes in Snow in August. I saw the theme even in Fahrenheit 451, that one person could possibly make a difference. In The Kite Runner, we certainly read about redemption. Mountains Beyond Mountains, again, one person really could make a difference. And although I think some of us were amazed that one person like Paul Farmer could be that way, we stop and think about sometimes the little things that we can do to make a difference in people's lives. Yes, we read about the Holocaust and we read about illegal immigrants, and that sparked more discussion last year than probably anything, and some very heated discussion. But we saw about those types of things. Well, being very comfortable in December usually means that you can turn on the TV set just about any time of the month and catch part of It's a Wonderful Life. It's always on television. And you never have to watch the whole movie. You can just kind of jump in at any point, and you know where you are in the movie because you've seen it so many times. And you can remember all those things, and one person really can make a difference. And we have really great things going on in our lives, and we forget that. And we need to stop and remember how wonderful things are. So when we pick a book called Life is So Good, I have to stop and think, is my life really that good? And most days, if I actually stop to think about that question, I think most of us can answer and say, yeah, there's some really good things going on in my life. Once I stop and not worry about all the trivial things. So we have an author today who's come to us from Port Townsend, Washington State. It's on the other side of Puget Sound, so go to Seattle and take the ferry across and just keep on going. So he's come from us a long way, and having read an article in the newspaper saying about a man who learned to read at 98, and that man can actually think about how wonderful life can be. Boy, when you read the book, you'll realize that he's seen some terrible things, and he still thinks life can be pretty good. So I'd like you to welcome, before I welcome, Betty Ann said that there were bookmarks back there, and I'd urge you each to take 5 or 6 or 8 of them and hand them out to your friends and encourage them to read. Now, this is the fairly senior set here, okay? I want you to make sure you stop those high school kids in the area and ask them what did they think about the book. And if they haven't read it, you tell them, now go read it because you need to read it for school. And then all summer long, badger the kid, okay? So, from Port Townsend, Washington, the author of Life is So Good, please introducing Richard Glaubman.
Thank you. That's. Can you hear me okay here? Am I in the right spot? Thank you. That was very nice from both of you. I appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here. Actually, this is my second visit. I was here, I think it was about a year and a half ago. It was in December, a year and a half ago, and I spoke at the Norwich Free Academy, and I was very impressed with the school, and I'm getting to know the community better. So it's a real pleasure to be back, and I'm appreciative of it too. It's said that there's a time in everyone's life when it's their time to tell their story. Well, if that's true, there's also a time in everyone's life when it's the right time to listen to someone's story. And though there was a huge gulf between us because of age, race, and religion, George Dawson and I needed to share our story. And while those differences never went away, we struggled together so that we could share our story. In a timeless way, he was an old man who had led a long and satisfying life, ready for the next step. But at the same time, his life was incomplete, for he had this burning desire to tell his story before he died. And while he had been illiterate for almost a century, I had had the good fortune to grow up in a family that valued the printed word. And as I listened to this man tell his story, I could see it in print. Today, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk about George Dawson and the story of his life. My connection to George Dawson started when my wife, Jody, pulling a section from the newspaper that was spread out across our kitchen table, said, "You need to see this article. It would be a good one for you to take down to school." Fresh scones in the Sunday paper is one of our Sunday morning traditions. After pouring myself a cup of coffee, I looked at a photograph that came from another world. It was a photo of a proud man, an old black man standing on the porch of his old wood frame house with his book bag in hand. And it spoke volumes, but carried with it an air of mystery. That was a long time ago now. It was the winter of 1998, and the article by Larry Bingham told about a man who was celebrating his 100th birthday party at school and reading his birthday cards by himself for the first time in his life. He had learned to read and write after starting school at the age of 98. So I did take that article down to my own school. My fourth grade students had questions, such as, what grade is he in? And if he is in a third grade reader, is he in a class like ours? And most importantly, for some reason, does he sit at a desk like we do, which means those short ones like that? And does he, and this is the important question of it all, does he go out on the playground for recess? Those were all really good questions, and I had some of my own too. My questions were more of, how could he start at age 98 and learn how to read and write when I had once taught first grade and the appropriate age supposedly to learn how to read, and the success rate was not as good as his. How did he just learn to read like that? To me, it was also incredible just to think of the history he must have seen in 100 years of living. So to answer their questions and mine, I called and talked to George Dawson and his teacher, Carl Henry. That call was down at their school, and in a brief and polite conversation between strangers, they said, "Stop on by sometime and we can talk some more." A nice way to end a conversation. And that was that. Except that 3 weeks later, I flew 2,000 miles, landed in a city in which I knew absolutely no one, and knocked on their classroom door. To this day, I still don't know who was more surprised, them or me. Only later did I learn that Mr. Dawson turned to Carl Henry, his teacher, and asked, "What should I do? Never talked to a white man before." He had worked for white people all his life, but conversations, if you would call them that, had been limited to, "Everything is just fine, sir," no matter what the question was. But still, that first visit led to a series of visits, and with an invitation that at the time I didn't realize demanded such tremendous courage as it went against all his experience of race relations, he invited me to live at his house. Living with him changed the direction of the book I was beginning to write, but looking back, more importantly, it changed the direction of our lives. I learned that as impressive as an accomplishment as it was to learn how to read, that was only a small part of his life. The real accomplishment was that in 100 years of living, the desire to learn still burned strong. And his question, why am I still alive and healthy at age 100, had an answer. George Dawson's mission was to record his story in print, and by doing that, help others to find a way to better their lives. To do that, we had to talk. To talk, we had to listen to each other. And then even after we began talking, time was against us. How many tomorrows would there be? Some nights we talked late, for tomorrow was not a promise. The first evening I said, "I'll see you in the morning and we can talk some more." He responded with a laugh. "I hope so, son. That would be just fine." While it shook me up a bit the first time, I understood the message. Take nothing for granted. Be grateful for this day. And I learned that in his long life, it had always been that way. In a life with a childhood lost to poverty and racism, he only had gratitude for what was. The bitterness, the regret that I expected to record did not exist. So along with the half-finished manuscript, I had to throw out all of my assumptions and start over. But eventually, the book that we worked on together for more than a year did become a reality. And it might have been the hardest thing that either of us had ever done. Yet, when completed, it was only a book. More important, in that year, my world had expanded, and so had his. And I saw, looking back, that from the earliest time of the written word, history has been recorded from the viewpoint of the victors of wars fought over race, nationality, religion. It's written by the pharaohs, not the slaves who built the pyramids. History's been written about the owners of the railroads, not the workers. History was written about the timber barons, not the mill workers. History has always been written about the Mississippi captains along the river, not the men who toiled to build the levees. Though illiterate, George Dawson had been a very observant man. And he had a perspective of history that, while it's not always recognized, he intuitively understood to be just as true and as valuable as the history that had been recorded by educated scholars. And upon learning to read, George Dawson suffered a huge disappointment when he discovered that the working man's history that he wanted to read of was so rarely recorded. I had come to write about a man that learned how to read. He was proud of that. But with his newly acquired literacy had come a greater vision. I was to write his story, and in the life and times of George Dawson, the story of other working men and women like himself would also be recorded. And I thought, he's right to want that. But when I looked at the enormity of what he proposed, I saw only problems. Seated across the kitchen table, only 3 feet apart, we were also separated by 300 years of racial history. I had more formal education than he did. And even if he didn't realize it, I understood that race, age, even geography were too great of a barrier between subject and writer. And I thought those were all good excuses. But he waved them all aside. That left me no choice but to tell him the truth. The real truth. And finally I said, I've had enough rejection the last 25 years to wallpaper the bathroom. I have yet to have one manuscript accepted for publication. As much as I love this story, if I were to write a book about your life, it probably won't get even read by a publisher. And I see this story now. It's too important. It should be recorded. I'm not the right person for it. In all fairness to you, I have to admit I can't do it. He must have seen something in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself. And he said, waving his finger at me, never say you can't. Always say you can. And looking across the table at this man who had lived, in my estimation, with 100 years of courage, I could only say, yes, sir. He handed me a pen and said, we ain't got no time to waste. Born in 1898, George Dawson was the grandson of slaves. In more than a century of living, Dawson saw 19 presidents, 2 world wars, the rise of the KKK, the power of the civil rights movement, and of course so many inventions that are now taken for granted. The telephone, the automobile, the airplane, the radio, among others. But because he couldn't read, he was always limited to lower paying jobs. Yet somehow living in poverty, he led a rich life, full of meaning and satisfaction. He raised 7 children, all of whom graduated from college. In 1916, just before the United States entered World War I, And I used to have to check sometimes, what war are we talking about? When he was 18 years old, his foreman at a lumber mill taught George Dawson to make the letter X and said, "Boy, this X will always be your name," as he drew it in the dust. And for the next 80 years, that X was his name as he worked for more than 7 decades, breaking horses, pounding spikes for the railroads, and working as a laborer. That changed at the age of 98 when George Dawson started school. He learned to read and write, and he took great pride in signing his own name. Reading and the world of books soon followed the alphabet. And with his new knowledge, he was able to contribute his own story to the world of books that he had just so recently discovered. The power of the written word changed his life. He traveled by airplane. He always took the window seat so that he could see everything there was to see. He went to New York, Chicago, and Seattle, and proud as any schoolboy, came back to his classroom with his press clippings. His teacher always giving him time for show and tell after each of our book tours. School came late in life for him, but by then, like everything else, it was a moment to be savored. It was as if he had entered the 20th century all at once. And yet, when the 21st century came, this man, who then walked in 3 centuries, or had walked in 3 centuries, had plans and hopes and dreams for the future. You're never too old, and it's never too late, he always told me. He was aware that in this new century, which he had never expected to see, he had somehow become a role model and an inspiration for others. He accepted that with pride, never as a burden. You can't help everybody, but you can always help somebody, son, he used to say. Son would apply to everybody that was younger than him, which was virtually the population of the world. But people with college degrees came to him for wisdom, and he took it in stride. As he said, "I've been ignored for 100 years. If people want to talk to me now, that's just fine." Having lived more than a century, Dawson was a vibrant, vital man whose life was still cut short too early. At the time of an injury, a fall in which he hit the back of his head that led to his death, he was learning something new every day, meeting new people, and had a ticket in hand to travel to New York City to be awarded an honorary doctorate degree. In both age and in health, he defied the odds. But as he would be the first to admit, no one can change the rules. After walking in 3 centuries, George Dawson died July 5th, 2001. He was the common man, but not forgotten. At his funeral, 1,700 people came to say goodbye, to honor him for the courage it took to make his desire to learn to read a reality. The people of Dallas, the citizens of Texas, were proud of this modest man and had taken him as their hero. But the inspiration from his commitment to learn had no borders. A Puerto Rican immigrant to New York City that had not left his barrio in over 2 decades started school when he learned what George Dawson had done. A man from Australia, a resident of a nursing home who had given up on life, sent an email that he had changed his outlook. The first 98 years of George Dawson's life were remarkable indeed. His survival with quiet dignity was something to look back on with pride. But he didn't look back. He looked forward and had a lifelong dream ahead of him to fulfill. And though it was only 5.5 years from the day he started school till death ended his studies, that was a most important part of his life. As he often said, "I've learned more, talked about ideas, and met more people in the last 5 years than in the first 98 years on this earth. I walked into another world, all because I learned how to read." That's his story, and my story with him still goes on today as I get to be here sharing that. And I know he touched so many people. And for those that have listened to what he said, and more importantly, watched how he lived, there's lessons for everybody. And people still ask me, what did I learn? Well, for one thing, and when I look back, it changes actually all the time when I look back with that question. But for one thing, I learned to respect my intuition. Before I even started this story, there was a battle between logic and intuition that raged inside of me. I was inspired by Larry Bingham's article, and I wanted to meet George Dawson. I booked a flight. I thought about it. My mind told me that it didn't make much sense. I canceled the flight. Yet something inside of me said, go. I rebooked my flight. Canceled, rebooked, until my wife said, just go. But the struggle between logic and intuition was a continuous struggle. From the beginning, I was careful only to talk to people that would encourage my dream, not try to be helpful and point out the problems. You know what I'm talking about, the people that always say, yeah, great idea, but, and then it dies. But I was looking back, recognizing that even at age 98, when George Dawson started school, he had no idea what would be in front of him when he took one step forward and started school that day. Age 50, I didn't know what was in front of me when I stepped on an airplane headed to Dallas. Dawson stepped into the modern age when he became literate and learned how to read. Now, only a decade later, one becomes literate when he or she steps into the digital age. And it is an exciting age we live in. It's all one that we share and contribute to. But whether it's the oral story or the written word, or in digital format or in print, real communication is about sharing those stories with each other so that we can learn to know each other better and pass on something to those behind us, or learn from those behind us and pass on something to those that are going to follow. That's what he taught me, I think. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you all. I, again, remind you that if you have books that you want signed, we will be at Bank Square Books shortly. They have books to sell and to have signed. And we certainly encourage you to participate in our programs all summer long, either here at Groton or all of the libraries in the region. We have a series of programs that will be going on all summer long, every Wednesday night. And I hope you'll check out the schedule, because we have a lot of exciting things planned. So enjoy, and we'll see you back in September for when the author returns.